Games have always leveraged licensed properties, from films, TV shows, to books. Early licensed games emulated the popular games at the time. 2D mascot platformers, brawlers, fighters, mostly relegated to marketing tie-ins for a new release in the franchise, or leveraging that franchise in an attempt to increase sales. More often than not, they were not of great quality. Of course, there are some exceptions, GoldenEye being one of the first instances I can recall at the time knowing it was a game based on another piece of media. As gaming has evolved, developers begun to explore different types of storytelling with more intricate narratives and complex themes, including material that does not necessarily fit into the pre-existing property, such as Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, using the themes and settings of the franchise to tell its own story with characters not included in the movies. To me, this makes a game stand out from the others' take on the franchise. It takes the themes, setting, and tone of the property, but tells a unique story all its own. Another way a game based on a licensed property can stand out is making the player feel like the protagonist or main character of the property. The Batman Arkham series springs to mind. Telltale Games is or was no stranger to taking on a licensed property, from their earliest work using the CSI license to the lauded Walking Dead series. It wasn't until said series that the studio gained mainstream attention and popularity. What made the series captivating for players, besides the writing, was taking the themes, tone, and setting of the property and allowing the player to inhabit their very own character, not an existing character in the series. Using The Walking Dead Season 1 as an example, the protagonist is Lee, a character not included in the shows or comic books. You take control of his story at the beginning of the zombie outbreak. With little exposure to Lee's backstory, it is up to the player to imprint themselves on Lee, making decisions usually based on your own experiences or relying on what little information you have about him. As Lee, you have two motives: trying to be the leader of a group assisting in a survival, much like Rick from the TV shows or comic books. The other being a father figure to a young girl named Clementine, assist in her upbringing whilst the world is spiraling into chaos. Due to not knowing how the character of Lee would react, your own personal influence becomes a part of the decision-making process. Many of the games following The Walking Dead followed the same formula of playing as original or little-known characters. In Tales of the Borderlands, you play as Reese and Fiona, or the Forrester family in Game of Thrones. Telltale's Batman Season 1 was the first Telltale game where I was playing as the main character of a licensed property. Previously, I had stated that licensed games are more interesting and usually at their best when playing a new or little known character, or the game makes the player feel like a character from the licensed property. To me, Telltale's Batman highlights the first problem of using the main character of a franchise, as I felt I was bound by the lore that came before. First, did I actually feel like Batman whilst playing the game? To my surprise, yeah, I did. There were moments where I actually felt like Batman. Telltale Games are known for the animations following quick-time events to feel, well, stiff. This leads to the controller input and action on screen feeling disjointed. To alleviate this, there are sequences where you mark out your moves prior to breaching an area and executing them. You select enemies, usually using a drone, another Batman touch. Choose the method of disposal and take out the enemies selected. This simple tweak to the Telltale combat formula, but one that makes you feel threatening, calculating, and someone who is stalking their prey. A small touch like this feels like an approach Batman would actually take, lying in the shadows, waiting to strike. However, these sequences miss a golden opportunity by not having multiple ways to take foes down. Having multiple options would grant the player freedom of choice on how to dispose of the enemies, and fit right into the rest of what Telltale Games do best. There are also investigations. Investigations involve the player navigating through a crime scene, looking for clues, and how those clues come together to form a recreation of the crime scene. Again, this makes you feel a lot like Batman, attempting to deduce the events. Unfortunately, investigations are a little underbaked. Besides the link between clues being mostly obvious, there are no loose ends or false leads removing any complexity. Each of the clues will match another, robbing the player of any thought-provoking discoveries and getting to a conclusion that makes you feel like a detective. Both good additions assisting to make the player feel more like Batman, even though the options are underdeveloped. The bigger problem I had is the story. Not because it is particularly bad, but the character you play as and interact with are for the most part iconic. You know their backstory and how they weave into the greater narrative. Catwoman is a love interest who skirts the line of good or bad to get what she wants. Two-Face has all the intentions of being a visionary and making Gotham a better place, but before becoming a villain. When making decisions on a timer that affect the story, a Telltale staple, instincts kick in and you lean to what you know. With Batman, unlike the earlier example of The Walking Dead, you lean not so much of what you imprinted on the character, but more so what you already know about the character. For Batman, you know the other character's place in the story. I played into Catwoman being the love interest, even when personally I wouldn't have made the same decisions. After completing the first season, I began to think, why didn't I at least attempt to break the mold of a Batman story? Why not tear down all my preconceived notions just to see what would happen? The truth is, I don't think the player is incentivized to do so. In earlier Telltale titles, such as The Walking Dead, there is downtime between the main cutscenes where the player can learn more about the setting and characters. As the player, you can interact with the environment, talk to other characters, just in general build a greater connection to them. During these times, you're not directly impacting the story, but it assists in telling the story in two ways. One being, you get an understanding of the other character's motives. Why is a character acting a certain way? Who is this character on a more intimate level? And is this character a potential friend or foe? When it comes to making a decision impacting those characters, you are making a more informed decision based on these other pieces of knowledge. In Batman's case, there is very little of these quieter moments and therefore more easily resort to decision making on name alone. The other issue is pacing. In Batman, you regularly go from important scene to important scene to important scene, seemingly at a breakneck pace. Rarely do you get the chance to think about how your previous actions affect the characters involved. Whilst navigating the quieter scenes, your mind is allowed to wander, thinking about previous decisions or conversations in the background. The next time an important choice is placed in front of you, there is more information for you to draw upon, resulting in making decisions based on the name alone rather than the potential to impact this story, which very much follows a character's personality from another piece of media. Rather than using the storytelling devices that exist in gaming to tell a unique story, I feel I'm just being told a Batman story. There could have been a unique tale for the player to explore, but unfortunately, even if it existed, the design meant I wouldn't have experienced it.